The morning had the usual calm, sunlight slipping through the curtains and casting soft patterns across the worn carpet I had carefully chosen with Maria years ago. The quiet of the house felt heavier than normal. Only the steady ticking of the old clock and faint traffic sounds filled the air. I sat in my favorite chair, nursing a cup of chamomile tea, hoping for some peace. But my chest tightened with a strange unease I could not shake. Marcus appeared suddenly in the doorway, his easy charm replaced by a cold, unreadable expression. I braced myself for the words I feared and yet did not fully expect. "I've made the arrangements," he said plainly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "The funeral, it's all set. Invitations have been sent out. Everyone will believe you're gone by tonight." His tone was void of warmth, clinical and cruel. My fingers clenched around the cup, the ceramic pressing uncomfortably into my skin as disbelief crashed over me, like waves pulling me under. A fake funeral? For me? The depth of his betrayal stung with an unbearable sharpness. Memories of decades of sacrifice, the scholarships, the medical bills, the quiet hopes for his future, tumbled through my mind, mocking me now in their futility. This man, my own son, was plotting to steal my legacy while I lived and breathed. Yet, despite the storm inside, my face was calm. Decades of experience had taught me how to mask my true feelings. I studied his smug confidence with cold calculation. He believed himself already victorious. He threw a heavy envelope onto the table. It was the invitations, thick cream paper edged in gold. "They'll all be there, neighbors, friends, distant relatives," he said. "Once the funeral's underway, the lawyers can fast-track the estate paperwork. Without you here, there's nothing to stop it." Swallowing the lump in my throat, I fought back the urge to lash out. Instead, I let a thin smile slip across my lips, brittle but deliberate. "If that's what you want, Marcus," I said quietly, voice steady despite everything, "I will play along." His triumphant smirk deepened, eyes gleaming like a predator sensing victory. With no further words, he turned and left, already moving to finalize his grim plan. The weight settled heavily on me as I quietly retreated to the study. Each slow step was measured and deliberate, a reclaiming of self amid the chaos. Behind me, his mocking laughter lingered, the sound staining the rooms we once shared. The house suddenly felt hollow, like a theater rigged for betrayal. Once alone, the mask slipped. Silence pressed down like a shroud, pain swirling inside me. Yet beneath that hurt, a faint but steady spark kindled. A fire built from years of endurance, now awakening as something colder and sharper. I would endure this humiliation, but not be broken. Quietly, patiently, I would gather my strength and wait. The game had begun. Sitting alone in my study, with only the soft glow of a desk lamp cutting through the growing evening shadows, I let my mind drift backward through the years. The quiet of the room was both a balm and a torment. Memories, I had plenty of them. Some warmed me like a familiar fire on a cold night. Others stung deeply, the latent scars still fresh beneath the surface. I remembered the tight budgets Maria and I had struggled with when Marcus was in college. It had taken every ounce of our discipline and sacrifice to put him through school, believing that education would be the key to a better life. I had watched him sign up for extra shifts at work to pay rent after graduation, convinced he was heading toward independence, ready to stand on his own feet. Those were simpler times, filled with the hope of a son walking a straight path, building a future with integrity. How naive that hope now seemed. Our family home had been my fortress, the place where decades of diligence and careful planning took tangible form. I'd mortgaged nearly everything just to cover Maria's medical bills during her final years, each payment a silent promise to keep our family safe and secure. I had thought Marcus understood this, that he realized the weight of those sacrifices, the unspoken debts paid in sleepless nights and cut corners. But the man who stood before me today, cold and calculating, was a stranger shaped more by greed than gratitude. I saw him in my mind's eye as a boy, bright-eyed, bursting with energy and dreams. I recalled the nights I stayed up, poring over spreadsheets and budget reports, calculating how to stretch every dollar. The pride I felt when he first called me from his college dorm, eager to share a small victory or a new idea. Then, slowly, the shift had come. The soft-spoken thank yous and gentle "I appreciate it, Dad" transmuted into curt nods, then into outright disdain. Each interaction chipped away at the bond we once shared. The past seemed almost surreal now, a distant portrait of a son I no longer recognized. Sitting here, I could almost hear Maria's gentle voice cautioning me to temper my anger, to find peace in forgiveness. But how could I forgive when the wound was still fresh, the betrayal so sharp? I felt the bitter taste of failure mingled with sorrow. Had I done something wrong? Had my patience, my generosity, encouraged this sense of entitlement rather than gratitude? Yet beneath the crushing weight of these reflections, something stronger began to crystallize. The torment of broken trust was transforming into a simmering resolve. I was no longer the man broken by his son's treachery. The man who had spent a lifetime mastering the nuances of finance and strategy was still here, watching, calculating, gathering strength. No longer was I the father who compromised and accommodated, hoping for respect in return. Now, I was a man preparing to exact justice, measured and precise, wielding the tools honed over decades of consulting. I would not rush into confrontation. The game was subtle. It required patience and foresight. Let Marcus think his scheme was succeeding. Let him bask in his illusion of power. That was his fatal mistake. I thought of the countless hours I had spent poring over balance sheets and risk assessments. Each number told a story. Each transaction was a thread that, when woven together, revealed intent and deception. I would return to that world, not just as a retiree resigned to his fate, but as a strategist ready to expose every fault line in Marcus's fragile empire. The study was filled with reminders of my former life. Folders of old client reports, legal texts, my favorite fountain pen resting on a leather-bound notebook. Each was a weapon in this silent war. My fingers traced the edges of the documents, feeling the familiar texture and weight, grounding me. I began drafting mental lists, debts to investigate, contacts to call, potential weaknesses to exploit. I recalled an old colleague I trusted, a lawyer who had once helped me navigate a difficult financial dispute. She owed me favors, perhaps more than one. I would reach out under the guise of routine matters, quietly rekindling connections that could tip the scales. Meanwhile, I would dig deeper into Marcus's financial dealings. His greed was reckless. No doubt there were dangerous holes in his hastily assembled schemes. I allowed myself a private, bitter smile. He had made the mistake of underestimating me. He believed that age had withered my sharpness, that I was a relic to be discarded. That arrogance would be his downfall. But this was more than a fight for money. It was about reclaiming dignity, restoring order where chaos had taken root. I reflected on the years I had lived by a simple principle. Justice must be restored and arrogance punished. That dictum, once a distant ideal, had now become a personal mission. As the night deepened, I settled into the rhythm of planning, methodical, unhurried, unyielding. The strategy was clear. Move quietly, gather irrefutable evidence, and wait for the perfect moment to confront the betrayal with justice not just served, but undeniable. I was no longer the betrayed father alone in his study, nursing a broken heart. I was the provider wronged, the silent strategist poised to reclaim what was mine. And so, beneath the heavy weight of memories and the ache of deep wounds, a flame burned brighter, a promise to myself that I would not falter. This was no mere battle. It was a reckoning, born from years of sacrifice, now turned toward measured revenge. In that quiet room, lit only by the lamp's glow, I made a vow. Marcus would learn that some legacies cannot be stolen, and that justice, patient, precise, and unyielding, always finds its mark. The days that followed were a difficult dance. Every conversation, every casual remark Marcus allowed himself to make became a thread I pulled at, unraveling the fabric of his carefully constructed deception. I had re-entered the world of ledgers, contracts, and whispered negotiations, not as a passive observer, but as a master strategist resurrected from the ashes of betrayal. Late one evening, after Marcus had left for what he thought was a routine dinner with business associates, I sifted through a pile of papers I had unearthed from the cluttered office he kept in the basement. It was poor form, to be sure, entering without permission, but desperation and instinct had driven me there. Among the faded receipts and hastily discarded notes, I found something far more sinister than mere greed. Documents forged with a deliberate hand. Signatures that were close but not exact. Financial maneuvers that smelled of laundering and fraud. The realization struck me with cold precision. This was more than just an impatient son chasing an inheritance. Marcus was actively dismantling the foundations of our family's legacy, weaving schemes that put not only me, but everyone connected to our name at risk. It was as if he saw me not just as an obstacle to his fortune, but as a relic to be erased entirely. That night, as the house settled into silence, I replayed in my mind the latest confrontation. Marcus's smug phone call the day before, where he had dared to call me powerless, a man whose time had passed. The words burned, sharp and unforgiving. "You're outdated, Dad, just an old man clinging to what's already gone." I could still hear his laughter, a grating sound that cut more deeply than any blow. Instead of igniting rage, those words crystallized into icy resolve. No longer was I the aging figure to be discarded or pitied. I was the architect of my destiny, and from this moment forward, every step would be deliberate, every move carefully calculated. Marcus had declared open war, but I was far from beaten. I began by tracing his financial footprints, a complex web that stretched into shadowy corners. Hidden liabilities surfaced, debts concealed under layers of shell companies, pyramid schemes designed to funnel money away from legitimate scrutiny, and hurried transactions that betrayed panic rather than confidence. It was a house of cards, and my years in finance told me one strong push would bring it all crashing down. The next morning, I reached out to Eleanor, an old law partner who had helped me navigate legal battles years ago. Using a pretext about reviewing some estate issues, I carefully reestablished contact. There was no warmth, no familiarity, only a professional understanding of the stakes and the trust built from shared past victories. Eleanor, quick to pick up on the undertones beneath my formal tone, promised discretion and offered resources that would otherwise be beyond my reach. I also contacted former clients and associates, allies whose loyalty had been earned over decades. Quiet investigations began, papers requested, phone calls made under the guise of routine checks. Everywhere I looked, evidence accumulated. Marcus's nighttime phone calls, meetings shadowed with secrecy, transactions that defied logic but not the telltale signs of fraud. Each discovery fueled my determination further. Marcus's arrogance had blinded him, making him sloppy in ways that a careful eye would catch. He believed himself invincible, but I was the one who truly understood the value of patience. Where Marcus rushed to glory, I waited in shadows, building a fortress of truth. Despite my efforts, the ache of betrayal never fully left me. I recalled the boy who once eagerly drew pictures at the dinner table, a boy who had trusted and believed in me. The son I had hoped would become a man of honor was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. That sorrow lingered beneath my strategic mind, a quiet ache mingled with fierce resolve. As the weeks unfolded, Marcus became restless. He began to confront me with sharp words veiled as concern, hints of suspicion flickering in his eyes. One evening he stormed into the study unannounced, expecting to find me broken, compliant. Instead, he found a composed man, eyes steady, voice calm but resolute. "What do you think you're doing, Dad?" he demanded, frustration simmering. "This ends now. Stop interfering. You don't have the power you think you do." I met his gaze evenly, the cold steel of years of experience reflected in my own. "Power," I said quietly, "is not given lightly, Marcus. It is earned, maintained through vigilance and patience. You confuse haste with strength, but you will learn, too late, that true power lies elsewhere." His face twisted in anger, the mask of confidence cracking just enough to reveal fear. A small, flickering ember that let me know I was gaining ground. The reversal was subtle but undeniable, a turning tide in what had become a silent war between us. Over the following days, I intensified the pressure, moving discreetly to restrict Marcus's access to critical accounts, canceling questionable transactions under legal counsel's advice, and alerting creditors who began asking uncomfortable questions. His grip on his ill-gotten empire grew tenuous, tighter by moments, yet he remained unable to discern the source of his unraveling. This delicate dance, a contest of wills, of minds, became the rhythm of my days. Each move was cautious, calculated. I refused to be drawn into open conflict, knowing full well that the ultimate victory would not come from rash confrontation, but the quiet collapse of his schemes under the weight of undeniable evidence. Beneath it all, I felt a strange sense of renewal. The humiliation I had endured slowly transformed, replaced by the icy satisfaction of reclaiming control. Marcus's betrayal had been a brutal blow, yes, but from that wound, something stronger now grew. I was no longer a man broken by a son's greed. I was an adversary reborn, cold and methodical. The reckoning was coming, and when it did, there would be no escape for Marcus. His arrogance would be punished, his deceit exposed. And I would stand tall, the architect of a justice long overdue, ready to seize back the legacy he so carelessly tried to steal. The quiet war Marcus and I waged unfolded not in loud arguments or visible battles, but in the subtle moves and countermoves known best to those versed in strategy and patience. Outside these walls, life continued in its indifferent rhythm, but within my study, a storm gathered, a storm of betrayal, resolve, and calculated retribution. Each morning, I returned to the discipline that had defined my professional life, scrutinizing financial records, evaluating legal documents with an unerring eye crafted by years of experience. Marcus's tangled web of deceit became clearer with each passing day. A web woven from fraudulent loans, hastily created shell companies, and precarious investments balanced on unstable foundations. One discovery stood out: a dormant bank account whose existence had eluded me until that moment. Tracing its connections revealed it to be a pivotal link to a series of pyramid schemes Marcus had built in his reckless bid for wealth. The thought of innocent people ensnared in his schemes stirred a complex mix of anger and sorrow within me. This was no longer mere entitlement or youthful impatience. This was recklessness with consequences far beyond our family's fortune. The patterns growing beneath these transactions were the cracks in an unstable empire, and with every paper I examined, the inevitable collapse seemed closer. Gathering this information alone, however, was not sufficient. I needed allies, trusted professionals who could help transform suspicion and scattered evidence into the concrete facts demanded by law. I made contact with Eleanor, a brilliant and trusted lawyer from my past, whose sharp intellect and unflinching loyalty would be central to this endeavor. With her guidance, I assembled a small team of forensic accountants and legal experts skilled in navigating complex financial crimes, whose work would be discreet but decisive. My reach extended beyond Eleanor. Years of professional association and mutual respect allowed me to quietly reconnect with former clients and colleagues. These calls and meetings, often veiled in casual conversation, yielded invaluable insights. I also began discreet communications with regulatory agencies, alerting key officers to discrepancies while ensuring our investigation remained confidential. These connections formed an unseen network tightening around Marcus's misdeeds. While the practical steps took shape, I kept the ultimate stage clearly in view, the grotesque, staged funeral Marcus had orchestrated, intending it as the definitive act of his victory. In my mind's eye, that event would transform into a courtroom of public judgment, exposing the bitter truth to friends, family, and legal authorities alike. The timing of this exposure was crucial. Too soon would be reckless, too late would be a missed opportunity. Everything had to be perfectly orchestrated. Amid the flurry of strategy and investigation, moments of introspection offered essential grounding. The betrayal remained a deep personal wound. The son I once cherished had become a stranger intoxicated by greed. This pain, while sharp, was transformed into a focused resolve. I meticulously cataloged every shred of evidence, secret recordings, forged documents, financial irregularities, each piece a potential nail in the coffin of Marcus's schemes. I outlined a multi-stage plan. First, compile indisputable evidence. Second, use legal mechanisms to freeze assets and whittle away Marcus's control. Third, unveil the truth publicly in a dramatic, undeniable confrontation. Each phase was layered with contingencies designed to withstand attempts to evade or obstruct justice. Eleanor became a pillar of this effort. In numerous late-night strategy sessions, illuminated only by my desk lamp, we scoured reams of documents, drafted subpoenas and injunctions, and planned the legal assault with precision. Her calm pragmatism, unwavering loyalty, and tactical acumen balanced the emotional weight of my personal investment. We identified sympathetic government officials who could expedite investigations, allies who valued integrity and justice above politics and power. Simultaneously, forensic accountants translated the complex financial camouflage Marcus had constructed into clear, digestible reports. They untangled laundering operations, exposed fraudulent transactions, and painted a vivid picture of deceit that no court or jury could ignore. The clarity and precision of this evidence became as important as its substance. Justice demanded not only truth but convincing narrative. I often reflected on the ironic contrast between past and present. Marcus was a man who fancied himself a master of deception, yet he had little understanding of the depth of experience and skill standing against him. I envisioned Maria's steady spirit reminding me that this was not merely a quest for vengeance, but a restoration of honor and truth. Each step I took was a tribute to that legacy. With every passing week, the evidence mounted, the puzzle coming together with mounting clarity. The complex fraud, the hidden accounts, the phony transactions, all began to converge into an unassailable case. My study, once a quiet retreat, now thrummed with purpose. Documents shuffled, calls placed, legal documents prepared, each action a brick in the foundation of Marcus's undoing. One particularly telling evening as I reviewed yet another batch of incriminating materials with Eleanor, the gravity of our mission was palpable. The extent of Marcus's deception was staggering, but so too was the fortitude with which we confronted it. We were defenders of truth, holding fast against the tide of corruption and treachery. Amidst the somber weight of responsibility, a quiet smile crossed my lips, a reflection not of joy, but of peaceful certainty. I envisioned the day of revelation unfolding with theatrical clarity. The gathering Marcus had so eagerly arranged, becoming an arena of truth and consequence. The faces of friends and family would mirror shock and disbelief as the carefully concealed web was exposed. And the swift arrival of authorities would bring the final curtain down on Marcus's charade. The home that had once echoed with dreams and hopes bore now the steely marks of calculated resolve. Each interaction, every snippet of information, was a step closer to reclaiming the legacy Marcus so foolishly sought to dismantle. My hand remained steady, my mind sharp, a contrast to the reckless irresponsibility that had endangered all we had built. In this silent war, an unexpected clarity surfaced. What had begun as agony and humiliation now infused my actions with focused determination. Marcus's arrogance and recklessness were vulnerabilities I would exploit without mercy or haste. The reckoning that awaited was measured and inevitable. This was no impulsive act of revenge, but the design of a man who understood the value of patience and precision. Marcus's lies would unravel, his deceit would be undeniable. His hubris would bear the weight of consequences he had long ignored. When the time arrived, I would stand firm, proud not only as a man reclaiming what was rightfully his, but as the architect of justice fulfilled, ready to sever the ties of betrayal and affirm a legacy rooted in truth and resilience. Within the quiet confines of my study, beneath the dim glow of my lamp, and surrounded by the tools of my profession, I reaffirmed the vow that had carried me thus far. Justice, patient and unwavering, would find its mark. It was a promise etched not just in paper and law, but in the very marrow of my being, destined to restore what arrogance had sought to destroy. In the days that followed, a quiet and determined rhythm settled over my life. I moved deliberately, every step calculated, steering the course of a battle Marcus was too arrogant to see coming. His world, once so assured and untouchable, began fraying at the edges, unseen by anyone but me. I knew the hold he had on his empire was slipping, slowly, inexorably. My first move was to cut off his access to crucial accounts. With Eleanor's careful legal guidance, I initiated freezes and restrictions that were firm but discreet, avoiding any abrupt moves that might raise suspicion. Each limitation tightened the noose, severing streams of cash flowing through his hastily arranged companies. It was methodical work, requiring patience and precision to avoid tipping him off too soon. At the same time, I tackled the questionable transactions Marcus had orchestrated to mask his greed. These swift, shadowy moves were designed to cloud the trail of illicit gains. I unraveled them one by one. Eleanor's expertise allowed us to cancel or reverse many of these deals legally, tearing holes in his financial facade and exposing the cracks beneath his reckless ambition. Behind the scenes, my allies within banks and creditor networks began flagging irregularities. I arranged discreet meetings where concerned parties voiced questions Marcus could no longer ignore. Rumors of trouble began to circulate through his circle like a spreading flame, sowing doubt about his competence and control. The once formidable illusion he maintained was starting to erode in quiet but irreversible ways. Marcus's demeanor shifted noticeably. The cocky confidence gave way to tension and unease. He confronted me several times, hoping to intimidate or unsettle, but found instead an immovable calm. One night, bursting into my study in a storm of anger and frustration, he snarled, demanding answers. "Why are my accounts frozen? What's happening with these creditors? You're trying to strangle me." I met his fury with steady eyes, voice low but firm. "Recklessness has consequences, Marcus. It's time you face them." His defiance cracked slightly, a tremor betraying his fear. "You think you can stop me? This empire is mine, and I control it." A cold smile touched my lips. "An empire built on lies collapses easily. I am the wind that will bring it down." The war between us intensified from that point, though it remained hidden beneath the surface. Marcus's efforts to regain control became more frantic, edged with desperation. Each move he made was met with a calculated counter-move by me. Legal injunctions, financial restrictions, and the slow, steady exposure of his fraud. Daily, I absorbed reports from Eleanor and our trusted team, confirming the unraveling of Marcus's schemes. Regulators began closer scrutiny, creditors pushed back harder. The foundations of his empire were crumbling, undermined by evidence too solid to ignore. Yet, amid this fierce pursuit, memories resurfaced unbidden. I often found myself recalling the boy Marcus had been, the curious child with wide eyes and innocent dreams. Those recollections stirred an ache beneath my resolve, bittersweet but essential. They reminded me what had been lost and why this fight was necessary. There was no time or room for weakness. Every decision was weighed carefully. Success demanded patience, discipline, and a clear mind. I steered clear of rashness, knowing that only through steady, patient effort would I dismantle the tangled web Marcus had spun. Our encounters grew fewer but more charged. Marcus's confidence waned, replaced by brittle anger and veiled threats. I maintained my composure, refusing to engage on his terms. Each interaction served only to weaken his facade and strengthen my own resolve. These moments revealed his growing awareness of his vulnerability, though he still underestimated the depth of my strategy and strength. I anticipated his moves, neutralized threats before they emerged, and stayed multiple steps ahead in this dangerous game. Late nights were consumed by planning and coordination. Preserved the original language of the text and prepared for the critical moments ahead, orchestrating the timing to maximize impact. We reached out to regulatory allies, assuring them of impending disclosures that would demand swift action. Dismantling Marcus's financial fortress demanded relentless attention to detail. Complex legal frameworks, bureaucratic hurdles, and the intricate dance of financial politics could have overwhelmed a lesser man. Yet, progress continued, slow but steady. Every piece of evidence, unsigned contracts, duplicate signatures, obscure transfers, was cataloged meticulously. These fragments formed a weapon, precise and unbreakable, essential for delivering justice when the time came. I knew victory would come not through confrontation, but revelation. The final reckoning would be a moment of undeniable truth, when lies and deceit would collapse before the unforgiving light of fact. The grotesque funeral Marcus had arranged loomed on the horizon, a spectacle he intended as a crowning triumph. Only I knew it would become the stage for his ruin. When that day came, friends and family would witness the fall of a facade that no charm or fraud could sustain. The contrast between then and now weighed heavily. The house that once echoed with hope now vibrated with resolve. The resolve to reclaim, restore, and make right what had been broken. Though the path was lonely, the mission lent me purpose. The restoration of dignity was not merely legal or financial, it was deeply personal. Each morning, a calm determination rose with the dawn. Marcus's empire was in rapid decline, his power eroding beneath his feet. His arrogance was no shield, only a weakness I would exploit without mercy. When the moment finally arrived, I would stand unyielding, not as a man undone by betrayal, but as the architect of justice restored, ready to sever bonds poisoned by greed and affirm the legacy built on truth and resilience. Justice would be patient but relentless. This vow, etched within me beyond law or promise, was the compass guiding every step toward the reckoning that awaited, a reckoning destined to restore all that arrogance had sought to destroy. The morning of the funeral arrived with a heavy sky swollen with clouds, threatening rain, yet holding it back as if nature itself waited with bated breath. The house was filled with an unsettling quietness as neighbors and acquaintances shuffled in, their faces marked with solemn expressions and hushed whispers. They came to mourn a man they all believed dead, me. But I stood among them very much alive, my gaze steady beneath the weight of what was to come. This gathering was a grotesque stage set not for remembrance but for betrayal, yet it would become the platform for the reckoning I had meticulously prepared. Marcus glided through the crowd, his practiced smile a mask of triumph. He shook hands, accepted hushed condolences, and basked in the adoration that only a son feigning grief could command. His every movement was choreographed to reinforce the illusion that he was the heir apparent, the master of the legacy he so shamelessly sought to seize. The neighbors, distant cousins, and family friends looked on with genuine sadness, unaware of the poisonous web Marcus had woven beneath their feet. As the ceremony dragged on with its stilted speeches and rehearsed tears, I remained calm, silent in the back, watching. The irony was not lost on me. This funeral, meant to mark my death, was about to become the scene of Marcus's demise. When the moment arrived, I stepped forward. The murmurs turned into sharp gasps as faces turned in disbelief. The air thickened. Eyes locked onto me, the supposed departed. Marcus's smile faltered, his confidence slipping like sand through his fingers. He tried to recover, to force a jest or a sharp retort, but the room held its collective breath, waiting. I spoke in clear, resolute tones, unveiling the truth with methodical precision. Piece by piece, I disclosed the elaborate network of deceit Marcus had built. I presented forged signatures, hidden accounts, intricate transactions masked as noble business endeavors, but designed to siphon our family's wealth. Each revelation was like a blow, stripping away years of lies and exposing the stark, ugly reality beneath. The crowd's emotions swung wildly. Shock, confusion, betrayal, and anger all mingled in their eyes. Friends of Marcus exchanged uneasy glances. Family members whispered swift questions and cautions. The facade of the charming, successful son shattered amid whispers and accusing looks. Marcus's face twisted from disbelief to fury. He opened his mouth, perhaps to deny or to lie once more, but the arrival of legal authorities silenced him. Quiet but firm officers stepped forward, documents in hand, asset freeze orders, subpoenas, indictments, symbols of the unstoppable legal machinery primed to dismantle his empire. The courtroom's weight filled the space where mourning had been faked, and in that moment, the theater Marcus had constructed collapsed, revealing the man beneath, exposed and diminished. Witnessing Marcus being led away, surrounded by those he had once deceived, stirred a complex array of emotions inside me. The turmoil of anger, sadness, and loss mingled with the hard-earned satisfaction of justice served. None of it felt triumphant in the shows of common victory, but deeply personal, an assertion of truth reclaimed and dignity restored. As the crowd slowly dispersed, many faces still shadowed with disbelief, the house seemed to exhale a long-harbored breath. Once a place filled with hopes and whispered dreams, it now held the quiet power of resolution. The weight of deception lifted, replaced by the solemn promise of renewal. In the stillness, I reflected on the long road traveled, from the initial sting of betrayal through the painstaking, silent war of investigation and strategy, leading to this ultimate moment of reckoning. The sacrifices made, the sleepless nights spent piecing together the puzzle, the careful dance of patience and precision, all had culminated in this undeniable triumph of truth. I thought of the years spent shouldering burdens silently, the deep desire to believe in a son who would honor his inheritance through integrity. That belief had been shattered, yet the lesson that endured was clear. Power is neither given nor taken by force alone, but held by those who wield it with wisdom and responsibility. Though the battle was over, The journey forward was just beginning. The ties poisoned by deceit had been severed, yet my legacy, the foundation built from decades of resolve and toil, remained intact. With the shadows lifted, the path ahead was quieter but no less precious. Though the echoes of betrayal lingered, they no longer defined me. I found peace in the knowledge that justice had been administered not with rage, but with measured determination. The man I once was reborn in this moment, a guardian of truth, the silent architect of a legacy reclaimed. The funeral, designed to mark my end, had become the prologue to my renewal. Justice had found its mark, precise and unyielding, and I stood ready to face the future with dignity regained. In the days that followed the upheaval, a rare silence settled over my home. A silence filled not with emptiness, but with the sense of a long, tense breath finally released. The storm Marcus had conjured in his self-serving quest had passed, leaving behind a landscape altered yet imbued with newfound clarity. I was no longer the man fractured by betrayal. I was the man who had reclaimed his dignity through quiet, steadfast resolve. Sitting beside the window, the soft light of morning filtering into the room, I allowed myself to reminisce, not with regret, but with a measured understanding of the path that had led to this point. The years of sacrifice unfolded vividly in my mind, tightening budgets to pay tuition, mortgages assumed to safeguard our home, sleepless nights balancing ledgers while Maria's gentle presence lingered close. Each sacrifice had been offered silently, each hardship endured with the hope that Marcus would someday rise to the man he was meant to be. That hope, fragile and bright once, had been shattered. Yet from that wreckage emerged a lesson far stronger. Legacy is not counted merely in dollars or property, but in the endurance of principles and values tested by fire and reaffirmed by truth. Marcus faced consequences beyond financial ruin. His reputation, once carefully groomed and polished, lay in ruins. The trust he squandered could never be reclaimed. He had become a cautionary example of how unchecked arrogance and greed erode even the closest ties and the respect of those around him. Though his betrayal had cut deeply, my heart harbored no hatred, only a somber recognition of ambition unmoored from integrity. The embers of anger that had once flared instead gave way to a steady calm, a quiet acceptance that some wounds heal not by forgetting but by learning. As I reclaimed what Marcus had tried to strip, I discovered a measure of freedom, not only from his deception but from the weight of expectation and burden I had long carried. The house that had been a silent witness to tension and quiet despair now breathed again, filled with a subdued dignity and peace. It was a sanctuary where memories of love and sacrifice could finally find gentle rest. Days traced a gentle rhythm as I turned my attention toward restoring not only myself but the community woven around this home and family. The old friends came forward with tentative warmth, neighbors showing support in quiet ways. There was rebuilding underway, walls not only of brick and mortar, but of trust and connection. In the sanctuary of my study, I revisited the plans and notes that had guided my path, reminders of the strength found in patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. These quiet moments grounded me, a compass for the journey ahead. Sometimes the silence was almost too loud, a reminder of the losses still fresh, but within it, the seeds of new beginnings found fertile ground. They whispered of futures shaped by hope rather than betrayal, by healing rather than wounds. Most profoundly, I came to grasp a renewed sense of who I was, not merely the provider or patriarch shaped by past trials, but a man forged in endurance, emerging with principles intact and spirit unbroken. The legacy I would leave behind was no longer tangible wealth alone, but a testament to justice patiently won, and dignity fiercely held. Looking to the horizon, I understood life demanded from me patience, humility, and courage. The courage to protect what remains sacred, with quiet strength and a steady hand. The scars Marcus had etched into my story would always remain, yet they would no longer dictate its end. And as twilight draped itself over the fading day, I whispered aloud the words that had come to define my soul. No man's legacy is safe from betrayal, but justice, when patient and precise, always finds its mark. Once a distant aspiration, these words now anchored my spirit, the foundation of the peace I had fought so valiantly to reclaim. In that serene moment, the burdens I'd borne lightened, the past acknowledged, and the future embraced. The chapter of betrayal may have closed, but a new story had begun, one fashioned from resilience and quiet strength, ready to unfold in its own time. I was free at last.